14th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about 2024, looking at potential Republican primary candidates and mostly heavily focusing this video on Trump, looking back at the midterms and what he can possibly bring to the table in 2024 for the Republican Party, and also some logistics, his polling numbers, how he looks on the national stage and whatnot. Just diving straight into it, obviously 2022, the midterms were an extreme failure for Republicans. No red wave, obviously. This is old news, but it's important to take into consideration when we're talking about 2024 and Trump's popularity, since in the midterms, at least 30 of Trump's handpicked candidates lost their races, some of the most high-profile ones being Dr. Oz from Pennsylvania, which Pennsylvania is a pretty tight state. It always flips back and forth. Prior to this election, the two senators from Pennsylvania were Bob Casey, a Democrat, and Pat Toomey, a Republican, and they had won their respective elections for a few decades or so, or a decade. And then before that, the two senators from Pennsylvania were Specter and Santorum, which were both Republicans. And so before, it was one Democrat, one Republican, it was two Republicans. And so now we're seeing Pennsylvania trend more and more blue now that they have two Democratic senators, John Fetterman and Bob Casey. And then Georgia, obviously, with Herschel Walker being one of the most interesting candidates that we had in these races, probably, but Warnock winning in the runoff election in December, pulling ahead by 2 percentage points. And then Carrie Lake, this is the Senate race, but then we're going to get to Carrie Lake later. But Blake Masters, again, losing by 4 percentage points. And Arizona was expected to be one of the tightest Senate races in the country, but obviously Mark Kelly winning by a really good percentage point for him. And again, in Pennsylvania as well, Fetterman winning by 5 percentage points. Nevada also bringing home a win for the Democrats with Catherine Cortez Masto pulling ahead of Adam Laxalt. This was a much tighter race as it was projected to be. But again, all these races, none of them were really expected to go for the Democrats, especially not Pennsylvania. That was a huge surprise. And then Nevada and Arizona as well. Georgia was a bit more expected to go to Warnock, but nevertheless, it still was a very tight race. But anyways, the Democrats overall being really popular, and all these people, I think, who lost in these four main states were the Republicans were handpicked by Donald Trump. For example, in Pennsylvania, when the Republican primaries were going on in June or so, Mehmet Oz was against McCormick, who was the other Republican potential candidate, and McCormick was heavily favored. I think that he actually could have won against Fetterman if he was put forward, but for some reason Trump picked to support Dr. Oz instead of McCormick, and that gave him a boost among the Trump fan base in Pennsylvania, and that's what led him to become the Republican nominee, but then lose against John Fetterman on the statewide election. And then looking at the governor's races, there are a couple that were really important. Arizona, right here at the top. Carrie Lake was expected to win in many projections. Katie Hobbs was seen as the underdog, but nevertheless, Katie Lake still won because Carrie sorry, I keep on mixing up the Katie and the Carrie. Because Carrie Lake was extremely unpopular and she wasn't too liked, and she's really much a Trump clone. And so if she wasn't able to win the governor election, then that says something about Trump in 2024 and how he's going to perform in Arizona, with it also having with Arizonans electing two Democratic senators as well, Bart Kelly and Kristen Sinema. And Kristen Sinema has switched an independent, but at the time that Arizonans were electing her, she was a Democrat. Georgia, Brian Kemp was expected to win. Stacey Abrams didn't have the stance to win over the entire state, and then also she's somewhat unpopular, and then Brian Kemp just being the much more popular candidate, but he also isn't a Trump candidate, so he's against the normal MAGA fan base and more of a traditional Republican. So still, we haven't seen any wins from Republican candidates so far, since Carrie Lake and all the other Republican, or rather Trump-selected Senate candidates in the swing states lost. Carrie Lake as well, Brian Kemp not even being a Trump-endorsed candidate. And then Kansas, going to Laura Kelly once again. She was the incumbent. This was expected to be a much tighter race again, but Laura Kelly still winning. Maine, this was something that I didn't expect, honestly. I thought that LePage was going to win, or at least that it was going to be more competitive, but Janet Mills pulling ahead, because Maine has been trending more Republican recently in the way that they're voting in House elections and also more local statewide elections. they have been trending more Republican, so I didn't expect Janet Mills to be pulling this much, with a 13% lead. And then Michigan, which obviously that was a really tight race as well, probably one of the tightest, but Tudor Dixon losing, and again, Tudor Dixon being a Republican-supported candidate. And so you see that thing throughout most of these states. Nevada, Joe Lombardo isn't a Trump candidate either, and so overall, Trump did not have any success in these swing states or anything like that, and so I don't think he's going to win. And then some of the things that I'm going to be talking about when this isn't an election prediction video. I've already made one for Trump and Biden, so you can go check that out. But just looking at the, more specifics of the states. So Pennsylvania, we saw 7-8 in District 17, I think it was. Yes, I think it was 17. District 7, 8, and 17, which were the toss-up districts that were formerly, 2 of which were suspected to go to the Republican candidates, but all 3 ended up going to the Democrats, which again, major win for Democrats in Pennsylvania and having Pennsylvania trend more blue. And similar things we saw across the country, for example, in Colorado. District 3, this is one of the tightest elections, and the vote wasn't actually counted until a few weeks later, I believe, and only then did Adam Fritsch actually drop out of the race. He conceded his loss, which was only, as you see, this only by 600 votes, so less than 600 votes. So if you ever thought that your vote doesn't matter, well, there it is right in front of you. And so honestly, on a national scale, we saw this with the Senate, the House, the governor races. Trump was not liked at all in this election. Again, so many of his hand-picked candidates lost their races, and he's not looking too good. And then looking at somewhat of the field for the Republican Party, if Trump were to become the candidate, which, again, most sources do say that he's going to become the candidate overall, it's Trump up by almost 15 points. We see DeSantis, who obviously has been really ramping up in popularity over the last few years, especially now recently with the cultural war controversies that he's been causing with the Don't Say Gay bill, the Stop Woke Act, his banning of AP African American Studies in Florida, all these different things that make it so that he's getting more national attention. I don't know if he's going to become the nominee or not, but certainly he does seem to be gaining popularity where Trump isn't, and he's more so losing popularity and going down in the polls. Like, if we look back here and back then, certainly in a few months ago, Trump was looking much better. In most of these polls, he's in the 50s, in some he's in the 60s or the high 90s, or the high 40s, I'm sorry, and now he's in the low 40s, and he's not really getting those large polls of 55 too often, or the mid 50s. And so he's not looking too good, versus Ron DeSantis keeps going up. Back here, we only saw him at 8, but it's consecutively polling better and better, and 36 being one of his best polls yet. Pence, he's probably not going to become the nominee. Neither is Haley. She recently formally announced her run for president, I believe on Wednesday or Thursday, or maybe even Tuesday, I'm not sure, sometime this week. And she is running, but again, I don't think she's going to pull ahead. She's definitely not more popular than DeSantis nor Trump, so that's that. And then Pompeo, Cruz. These people haven't, Rubio, these people haven't announced their candidacies yet either. Neither have DeSantis nor Pence. It's really just Trump and Haley so far in this race, but it's expected that the field is going to get much more filled and much more competitive, which actually, the more the field is crowded with more people, the better it actually becomes for Trump. So when we're looking at 2016, when Trump became the Republican nominee and later became the president, obviously, he actually, at the beginning, in the very first poll taken for the Republican primaries, he only polled at 5%. He got 5% of the national vote in the first Republican primary poll. And 5% is not good. That's not that wasn't a plurality at all. Many other candidates were polling ahead of him. And yet he still became the nominee because of a lot of reasons, but because the field was so crowded. There are so many other candidates on this field that you see right now. They withdrew before the primaries, but all these other people were in the race. And the more people are in the race, the better it is for Trump, because he has this solid fan base, especially now, because then he was this new candidate that was supposed to be this non-political politician. And the thing with people who aren't in politics that come into politics is that they have this leg forward in the race, in that they can blame the issues that are currently happening in the country on these lifetime career politicians, since they don't have to, since they really have no reason to get blamed for those issues, since they haven't been in the establishment. Versus these politicians get the blame for issues that are currently happening since they've been there for so long. And so the question that Trump posed to many of these people is that, why haven't you fixed this by now? They won't fix it. And so I'm there to fix these problems. He was this new candidate that wasn't expected. He had been toying around with the idea for running for a lot of years by that point, and then finally made it official and ran and eventually obviously became the president. And so my point with this is that Trump now has this really thorough fan base. Even though he lost, or his candidates lost in a lot of these states, they still got some percentage of the vote. Mehmet Oz here getting 2.4 million votes, 46% of the vote in Pennsylvania. Even though John Fetterman won, Mehmet Oz, who only got this far because of Trump, and that's the honest truth, he was still able to pull a sizable percentage of the vote. And so, looking back, where was it? Yes, here. Trump is going to get, I suspect, 25 to 35% of the primary vote, no matter who he's running against in 2022. These being, or 2024, these being the main people who are looking to run and that are suspected to run. No matter who he runs against, he's going to get 25 to 35% of the vote, as I presume, because of that MAGA fan base that's loyal to him, that, stormed the Capitol. They are going to be voting for him no matter what wrongs he does, no matter how many times he goes against the Constitution and democracy. They're still going to follow him. And so the real truth is someone going to be able to get more than 35%, if that's the high end of my speculation at least? Someone going to get more than that to beat that plurality of his. And again, the interesting thing about the primaries is that no candidate needs to get a majority. Trump eventually did, but at the beginning he did not have a majority and he still could have won. And the question begs, is DeSantis, mostly because he's seen as the top challenger, is he going to be able to get more than 35 or more than whatever Trump gets to be able to win that plurality? Now, if there are other candidates in the race that make the field even more crowded, DeSantis is going to have more trouble if he does decide to run, which he is expected to. He's going to have more trouble pulling ahead of Trump, since the vote is going to be split among all these other candidates. Versus with Trump's vote, he is already going to have at least 25% of the vote from the beginning because of his Trump fan base, because of the MAGA gang that are going to be loyal to him. Now, the rest of these people could combine when they drop out of the race, because obviously at some point there are only going to be two people left, mostly probably Trump and DeSantis. And these other individuals, once they garner their own fan bases, they get to allocate, and when they drop out of the race, endorse one of these two candidates. And the question also begs, are these people going to endorse DeSantis? And they probably are. As we know, Pence hasn't spoken too highly of Trump after Trump asked him to not certify the results of the election. Haley, again, was working under former President Trump as the UN ambassador, but obviously she's going against him now and being his first challenger. Rubio not being too big of a fan. Cruz kind of stepping around it, not really condemning Trump for anything, nor supporting him too much, but more so leaning on the support side. And then the rest of the candidates being more negligible and not having the votes that could even give either of these candidates the support. But either way, the more candidates there are, and the point I'm trying to get at here is the more crowded the field is, the better it is for Trump. And then if Trump wins, then the Republican primary, we have to also look at his, when we're making our predictions for 2024, and also looking at what's going to happen, looking at what's been going on in these states, and also looking at their history. So when we look at the Senate, which is what I really want to be looking at right now, we have to look at all the different states that have had Senate elections and like how they voted. So I want to specifically focus on Arizona because I think that's a really interesting state. So going back, Arizona red, like, if you look at this during the McCain years, 24.2%. And obviously that was a really different time, and we can't compare it too much to now, since McCain was a very extremely different type of Republican than Trump was. You could call them opposites. McCain was more the type of Republican that we see Romney as now. And so he's very different, but still that same fan base sort of has grown up with the McCain ideal of Arizona. And they could bring that forward in 2024. But just looking at past trends, Arizona has always been somewhat red, except for this election, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce the same because I'm not familiar with this election. But looking at more recent history, it's always been red, and it's been consistently red throughout the years. And only recently turning somewhat blue with Sinema, who is now independent, but still they voted in a Democrat. That's something that's reoccurring with Arizona. And so the fact that Arizona was able to elect both two Democratic senators and a Democratic governor, that's saying a lot with the way that Arizona has been moving, and especially when all of those candidates that were running against the Democrats that lost were Trump-backed. That's not saying too well for Arizona. Arizona is 11 electoral college votes, and so it is a sizable proportion in the electoral college. That's going to be important for some to have, but the two states that are more important are Pennsylvania and Georgia. Pennsylvania, I believe, is 19 electoral votes, and Georgia is either 16 or 17, I think 16. Feel free to correct me on that. Pennsylvania, when you look at it, it's really much more split. It goes back and forth a lot, going red, blue, but really after a while, really sticking solidly red again with Specter and Santorum, but recently with Bob Casey. But when we look at the House race as well, just looking at this, the House in Pennsylvania is also really interesting in 2020, it being pretty split, and only becoming more and more red as we go back, some blue back here, but mostly red, and really only now becoming, as we look at, say, 2018. And then when we go to the House results from Pennsylvania, as I was explaining earlier, most of these districts that were priorly Republican districts became Democratic-held districts, and only, only 8 districts were won by Republicans, while 9 were won by Democrats. So overall, a lot of these races are going to be very important when looking at what's going to be happening in 2024 and what's going to be going on. I don't think that the Trump fan base is as strong as it was in 2016, certainly, nor 2020. I think that Trump has lost a lot of his popularity. As we look at the midterm results, as we already did, polling, he's been going down recently in his polling and his popularity. But just real quick, also looking at Trump versus Biden, a lot of more recent polls show Biden winning. Prior to that, it was Trump, and then Biden going back and forth, but consistently recently it's been Biden pulling up a few points above Trump. But either way, we know that this is going to be a tough and tight election, but I think that because of what's been happening recently, Biden is going to be pulling ahead. It is important to still keep in mind what's going to be happening over the next 2 years of the Biden administration, or rather year and a half before the election, and taking that into consideration certainly, and making sure that we look at those stats and speculate what's going to happen. And also, just real quick, also looking at DeSantis versus Biden, because I think that that's another interesting thing to see, that if DeSantis is able to pull over that 35 percentage barrier of Donald Trump's, if DeSantis would win against Biden or not. And these stats are much more conflicting. They show a larger tie. Again, DeSantis winning by 0.5, but that being a very large very small margin that has room to go back to Biden. And so this is also interesting to look at and see that even though DeSantis is popular in his home state of Florida, certainly winning by, I think, 20 or 30 percentage points this past midterms for the governor's seat, he is still, with the culture wars things that he promotes in his state, that wouldn't be as popular, certainly on the national level, as it is in Florida, and certainly not with many swing state voters. So again, thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts down below on everything we've talked about today. Down below, let me know who you think is going to become winner of the Republican primary election, and then also the presidential election.